It's difficult for them to lose weight?
It's really, really, really difficult. There's definitely a familial tendency. There's probably some genetic basis, but we haven't got there yet. But it is really difficult, and it's really about trying to reduce the carbs in terms of somebody with polycystic ovary disease, and there's no doubt about it. A lot of my consultations were involved with the way we live our lives, and a huge amount of it was about trying to improve the diet and trying to get a little bit of exercise going. And even losing something like 5 kilos would be enough to push somebody back into getting a regular period. It's really phenomenal. It was so gratifying when these girls came back. They'd lost 8 kilos and they'd come into me, and I could see by them, A, I could see that they'd lost the weight, but B, by the way they walked and how delighted they were.
So Paula, what is My Girls Gyne?
Well, Laura, My Girls Gyne is a company that myself and Geraldine Connolly set up together last year. And basically it's bringing together the medical side and the holistic side for adolescent gynecology, really with a goal to provide as much education as possible to girls and their mothers, fathers, carers, whoever is really looking after them, so that they have access to the best information possible.
Okay, and it's great because I put up a question box today, and within 2 hours I had over 200 questions. All I said was, I'm here, going on the pod with a consultant gynecologist who looks after teens and a yoga teacher and the pair of them want to educate girls and their families about this, and so many questions.
Fantastic.
So this is really going to be very informative, I think. And Geraldine and Paula. So just straight off the bat, Paula and I go back a long way.
We do.
Paula was one of my OG yoga teachers, and every time I see her I feel guilty for not practicing enough yoga. But anyway, I'm actually definitely going to go back to my Mysore class sooner rather than later. I think I'm just going to bite the bullet and go tomorrow. But anyway, that's for another time.
You'd be very welcome.
So let's go back, and can we bring in the gynecology element first?
Yeah, sure.
So Geraldine, if you could just give us a little bit of your background and what you do and the kinds of issues you have seen in teens over the years.
Yeah. Well, so I've actually just retired earlier this year, and my job was between the Rotunda and Temple Street hospitals. And I did obstetrics, and I did gynecology, and I did adolescent and child gynecology, actually. And when we started, people were going, what? What are you at? And my clinics were very small, but 20 years on, after taking retirement, I've had 2 people taking over for the service that basically was set up. So it's really interesting how over that number of years, there has been a real increase in people's awareness of problems that adolescents have and that little girls have in terms of their gynecology, and that people are much more likely to seek help, really.
Okay.
So it's been really, really interesting. Yeah.
And is there more of an awareness of it and people are more willing to talk about it now, or is there an actual increase in issues?
So I think I hate when people say it's both, but it is both. I think there's definitely more of awareness and people are much more likely to be talking about it. But also I think that with the differences that have occurred in our lifestyles in the last 20 years, I think this has really played into an increase in gynecology problems in youngsters, yeah.
Okay. And then how did you two get together then? Because very differing backgrounds. However, even just talking to you before here, really singing off the same hymn sheet, obviously, which is wonderful. Yeah. And it's all stuff that I try and do and talk about. So how did you meet and come up with this idea?
Well, during COVID, I set up an online course that really brought Ayurveda and yoga together.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there now, right? What's Ayurveda?
So Ayurveda is the Indian system of medicine. It actually dates back to about 5,000 years ago. And it goes hand in hand with yoga. It's a sister science to yoga. The two were always practiced together in ancient times. Obviously, yoga has become much more popular in the West, but Ayurveda has lived on in India, and over the last 20 years has started to gain more popularity, especially in the US and also in certain countries like Germany, for example. There's not a lot of it here in Ireland, but it is growing.
You did bring a doctor over from India and I went to see him actually. I remember I went down to Wicklow, or you put me in touch with someone that I went down to. And I got a whole prescription of foods to eat and stuff.
And we've had so many teachers actually who've come over from India over the years. We've been very lucky in that regard. But what I really loved about Ayurveda was that it looked all the time to find the root cause of problems rather than just address the symptoms. So I felt that during COVID times when people were very stressed, that it was the ideal thing to combine with yoga to really help people find a state of balance and also to treat COVID. Now, that is not to say only to take Ayurvedic medication during that time, but it was there as a support and we used it ourselves and our family and it was fantastic.
To help people recover quickly and just give their body back what they need.
Yeah, and
it's all through food, isn't it?
Through food and through herbs.
Okay.
So Ayurveda would have this saying that always treat with food first, and if food doesn't work, use herbs. So there are thousands of Ayurvedic herbal formulations that are fantastic for really helping to rejuvenate after illness and also to help prevent problems occurring as well. So I digress a little there, but over around 2020, I set up this course and Geraldine was one of the participants on the course and we got to know each other quite well. And then post-COVID, she started coming to the studio as well, and she was transitioning in terms of moving out of her job and then approached me about doing this together. And we thought, wouldn't this be amazing to bring both of these disciplines together in something completely new? It's very new anyway for the medical and holistic worlds to marry, I think, in the West.
Look at me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we just thought it would be a wonderful thing to do for teens. And I have a teenage daughter and I thought, okay, fantastic. I'd love her to have access to as much information as possible. I had taught yoga for teenagers for a number of years as well. And Geraldine obviously was very open to Ayurveda, to yoga, and she had seen herself what's possible with these disciplines. So we thought, great, let's take the opportunity.
And if I can interject there, so I'd have to say that finding Paula and her husband David was really a game changer for me. I was working very hard in a very stressful job. And I didn't really have a huge amount of life outside of that job. And really, both Paula, David, and then this other friend of mine, Emer, who runs Mind Canopy, really enabled me to actually leave my job. And I really believe, and I'm so grateful that they have actually helped me to change my life for the better, because the stresses of the job, I now know, because I would never have admitted it at the time, that I was totally burnt out. Particularly during the whole COVID thing, it was so stressful. And since COVID, it has remained at very high stress levels. And what I had found actually in my practice was that, so I was working at consultant level for about 20 years, started in 2004. By 2016, I was saying, what's going on? Because a lot of girls coming into me with their mums, mum was anxious, the daughter was really very anxious, huge increase in the number of girls attending psychiatry, attending CAMS, not able to go to school because of anxiety. I was going, what is going on? And this was new. Like, I was going, what's all of this about? And actually, it has evolved that in actual fact what was going on was a huge amount of social media use, but we might get onto that. But I really felt that there was a lot of information out there, a lot of people looking at information and going, well, I'm not doing that, so there must be something wrong with me. And I just felt we need to pull this right back, and we need to allow these girls and their mums to actually look at their whole lives in terms of how it's impacting on their health, their gynae health, because we really know that stress and anxiety has an influence on female gynae health. And so, there's a lot of this integrative medicine stuff starting over in the States, and it's coming into Ireland. And it is exactly this marrying together of things like mindfulness, meditation, exercise, diet, sleep, and this is what we're about.
Oh, and it's wonderful because I think that the two can work so well together. Contemporary Western medicine and the Eastern influences of food and diet, but then also I think exercise is something that people don't talk enough about, the fact that it is not for your body shape. Actually, exercise is for your mind, for your strength, and as we get older, to prevent osteoporosis, etc. Can I just ask you one thing though, because you did mention that you left your job and it was high stress, and then when you left, 2 people took over your job, which is interesting. Same kind of thing happened to me as well.
Yeah.
But losing all of your years of experience, right? Do you think that if you had a little bit of that extra body, that you would have been able to last that bit longer, or work would have been less stressful for you?
If I had
an extra body to work with like an extra person.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about it. It was a very lonely place. Now, I would have attended international conferences, particularly in the UK, where this whole kind of adolescent gynae stuff started. And it was always very reassuring to me when I go over there, I'm doing the right stuff, because it's a lonely kind of a place. But, I had it, I just had done it.
Okay.
And this is why I feel that I have a huge amount of experience, and I just wanted to bring it in a different way to people, to actually reduce the number of times that people need to come to see a gynecologist, or reduce the number of girls that are coming to see gynecologists, because if they were able to set the basis in terms of their diet and their lifestyle, a lot of these problems wouldn't arise.
Okay, so let's get on to the problems. And what, as in your practice, would you have seen what was the biggest problem people would have had, or the people that would have come to you for the most popular issue that people would have had with themselves?
Yeah. It's period problems.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's you get your period too early, or your period hasn't come, and people are worried. They're too heavy, they're too frequent, they're too infrequent, they're too painful. All of that stuff are really all around periods. That was the main thing that came to me. And really, we know that periods and the menstrual cycle is really influenced by, what's happening in your life. Yeah. Okay. And the stresses and strains and all the rest of it. Yeah.
Okay. So, we'd often hear of someone being put on the pill as a young girl, as a teenager, because she had heavy periods or infrequent periods. So would that have been the first line of what you would have done?
No.
I love the smile. And you're all listening here, very few will watch it, but the smile that Geraldine just gave me was absolutely not. And that's why we're here. So let's go.
Well, let's talk about the irregular period. Okay, so a lot of people believe that once you start your periods at the age of 12 or 13 or 14, that we should be getting it every month. And that's not the case. People forget that we are physiological human beings. We're not machines. And it can take anything up to 5 years for our system to mature in terms of having a regular menstrual cycle. And actually about 20% of adult women don't have a regular menstrual cycle. And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of your general health. As long as people are having reasonably frequent periods, say like 4 or 5 now, Paula may not quite agree with this from an Ayurvedic perspective, but from a medical perspective, it's not going to do you any harm. Now, it may mean that there's something going on in your system which might need to be addressed, but from a medical perspective, it's not going to do you any harm. So a huge amount of my work was about educating people about when the period comes. There are particular conditions that I would have recommended some type of hormone treatment for. If somebody, for example, was very overweight and was not getting periods, that person needs to be having 4 periods a year, and there's medication that we can give in order for that.
So why does someone need to have 4 periods a year if they're overweight?
So for starters, if you're 14 and you're of normal weight and you're getting 3 or 4 periods or 2 or 3 periods a year, there's no problem with that. But if you're 15, 16, 17, maybe your periods have been regular or maybe they haven't, and we're only getting maybe 1 period a year or maybe even less. What happens if you've got an adult body with a reasonable number or maybe too many adipose tissue, like cells, they're making estrogen. If you have a lot of estrogen rolling around in your system and you're not having a period, that can actually lead to a thickening of the lining of the womb, and therefore you need to be shedding that, and you need to be having a period. Yeah.
Okay. So if a teenage girl is overweight, that's a concern then, is it?
Yes, or if an adult woman is overweight.
Okay.
I mean, this kind of leads into this polycystic ovary thing, where, you know, not everybody is overweight who has polycystic ovary disease, but the vast majority are. We don't have ovulation, so we're not releasing eggs, and therefore we're not shedding the endometrium, but we're still feeding the endometrium, which is the lining of the womb, with our estrogen. It's getting thicker and thicker, so you do need to actually shed that, and there's medication that we can give to do that.
PCOS in and of itself as a disease causes that weight gain as well, does it? It's difficult for them to lose weight?
It's really, really difficult. There's definitely a familial tendency. There's probably some genetic basis, but we haven't got there yet. But it is really difficult, and it's really about trying to reduce the carbs in terms of somebody with polycystic ovary disease, and there's no doubt about it. A lot of my consultations were involved with, you know, the way we live our lives, and a huge amount of it was about trying to improve the diet and trying to get a little bit of exercise going. And even losing something like 5 kilos would be enough to push somebody back into getting a regular period. It's really phenomenal. It was so gratifying when these girls came back. They'd lost 8 kilos and they'd come into me, and I could see by them, A, I could see that they'd lost the weight, but B, by the way they walked and how delighted they were, and how, you know, an absolute,
just the confidence that it gave them.
Confidence that they gave them, and absolute positive feedback for them. It was so important.
Okay. And Paula, just to bring you in there now, because Geraldine did say you'd probably disagree with her from an Ayurvedic point of view about the regular periods.
Yeah.
Can you explain why you might do that?
Yeah, I mean, Geraldine mentioned
We
there
have a
that
bun fight.
that, you know, if a girl is getting 4 periods a year, then from a medical perspective, they're happy enough with that for a few years. From an Ayurvedic perspective, we would say, okay, there are 7 layers of tissue in the body, and the reproductive tissue is the 7th layer. So we start off at the top in terms of lymph or plasma, and then blood, and then muscle and fat and bone, nerve tissue, and then reproductive tissue. And all of those previous layers of tissue have to be nourished before a girl really has a period. So if a girl is getting a period on a monthly basis, it's a really good window into the overall health. It shows you that there's a foundation for health there because the previous tissue layers are all being nourished adequately. If she's not having a period on a monthly basis, it shows that there's something that needs to be addressed. So from an Ayurvedic perspective, we'd say, okay, well, let's start looking at what's slightly out of balance to bring that girl back into balance as quickly as possible so that problems don't arise further down the road.
Okay. Okay.
So we're really not at odds with one another.
No, you're absolutely not.
No, because I suppose from a medical perspective, somebody has come to me with a problem and I'm trying to address the problem. And increasingly I realise that's the wrong model. We need to actually turn it around and try and prevent the problem from happening, which is where Paula's coming from.
That's it. And actually that's what I talk about a lot as well is, you know, even just in China and traditional Chinese medicine and then traditional Ayurvedic medicine, people go to their doctors to stay well, to learn how to stay healthy. It's not that they go to stop and prevent symptoms. They don't go for the painkiller. They go and they get, so they're eating and they're living to stay well, not going to the doctor for the aches and pains, etc. Because they're preventing it in the first place.
And there's a real nurturing component to Ayurvedic medicine and traditional Chinese medicine as well that's not really present in Western medicine. And I heard somebody describe it the other day in terms of comparing it to wealth. So in medicine, we'd often say that health is the absence of disease, let's say, in Western medicine. And if you were to describe that, if you were to describe wealth in terms of the absence of debt, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person is wealthy. It just means that they've no debt. And it's an interesting comparison because really the definition of health in Ayurveda is taking a holistic view. So it's looking at the physical health, the mental health, and also, very importantly, the spiritual health.
Yeah. And spiritual health doesn't necessarily mean God or a religion.
Not
does
at
it?
all. No, I mean, you can use whatever word you want. It doesn't have to have anything to do with religion, but it's just that which is beyond the body and beyond the mind, that which is not changing, let's say, that part of you that's been with you from the time you were born and will be there when you die. So you might want to call it consciousness, soul, spirit, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
But it's fundamental in yoga and also in Ayurveda
okay.
as part of health.
Oh, you're just speaking my language. I could like, zone out and close my eyes and listen to Paula talk about that all day. So when you saw a girl and she was having irregular periods or even heavier periods, did you find that when you were educating them about their diet and their exercise, and if they took on board everything that you said, a lot of that would be rectified?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to kind of try and make it easy. There's no specific answer for everybody. So actually, I would have gone into what was happening in the child's life. So, for example, the 2 main years that girls would come into me with period problems would be their junior cert and leaving cert years. Stress, lack of sleep, probably not exercising as much as they used to do, probably not eating as well, particularly for the junior cert. I used to say, well, it's a bit of a quiz really, isn't it? It's not that important actually, Yeah. And even like I saw you had something on about leaving cert, and I mean 5 or 10 years down the line after leaving cert, most people don't even remember what they got in it. And it's just so much pressure about these exams. And really, it's just really kind of trying to pinpoint what it is that maybe can be addressed, and then just start to kind of dig down into what's going on in a girl's life. So, my consultations were taking longer and longer because I wasn't sending people out with the pill. Now, that's not to say the pill is a fantastic piece of kit for gynecologists. Can I just say it's marvellous? Because again, by the time a lot of girls came to see me, they were really down the road of unwellness. And in order to try and halt that, giving a prescription or a medication such as the pill is really useful to pull it all back and to control things such as really heavy periods, very frequent periods, and very painful periods. But I would always say, so this is a holding measure. Put you on this maybe for 9 months to a year. Then you will come off it and see how you get on afterwards. Often it's to do with maturation of our hypothalamus and pituitary and all of that. But also it gives time for the girl not to be iron deficient, anemic because of heavy periods. I'm telling her she needs to look at her stress levels, because you've got to put it into bite-sized pieces. So sort out that medical issue while looking back into what's actually caused it.
Okay.
So that's kind of what I'd be at.
And then in terms of the contraceptive pill, so there's been a lot of talk recently in the last couple of years, especially on TikTok. Now, God, my goodness, TikTok's a minefield. When I ever dare to go into it, kind of anti-pill sentiment.
Yeah.
And girls coming off the pill. And I even would have seen it in the pharmacy where a girl might decide, and when I say girl, I mean teenager or even in their 20s.
Yeah.
Anyone, I'm 43 now, anyone younger than 30 is a girl to me. But they come in and they would have decided to go off the pill because they heard that the pill was bad and caused breast cancer and it had all these side effects. But then they'd end up nearly coming in looking for the more natural then because they'd had sex and, we're scared and that.
Yeah.
But then you have this other group of girls that would have been maybe gone on the pill when they started becoming sexually active, say 17, 18. They were on it for their entire 20s. Then they start to want to have babies in their 30s and they say, I literally just discovered my libido when I came off the pill.
Yeah.
Their libido has been totally dampened down for their entire 20s, which is very unfortunate.
It's very sad.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on long-term contraceptive use like that? Or
Yeah, you see, I wish we had something better.
Yeah.
I really do. And there's no doubt about it that it's very much a risk-benefit thing, I mean, or a plus and minus situation, like how bad are your symptoms and how bad are the side effects and which is the least worst option, But there's no doubt about it that we've got estrogen receptors everywhere in our bodies, in our brains, in our salivary glands, in our gut, in our bowel, in our ovaries and vulvas, So when you're putting hormones which have receptors in your body, practically everywhere, of course you're going to get side effects, and it really does depend on what is the most important thing for you. I mean, if the most important thing for you in your 20s is not to get pregnant, well, then you're going to have to just put up with the symptoms, unfortunately. Now, our Pills have definitely improved in terms of we're using lower dose pills, certainly for contraception in people's 20s. So that in terms of the long-term side effects, I mean, the breast cancer business, you know, it's actually really tricky. The whole body of evidence, it's so conflicting. It's really, really hard to get a handle on what is actually really happening. And I think if we can get away without using hormones as much as possible, I think that's probably a good thing to do. But it's not possible for everybody.
No, and even with the Ballerine IUD, which is the uterine device, it's a new copper one, and it's small. It looks really pretty, actually, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that brings with itself its issues with heavier bleeds and also then the risk of pelvic inflammatory disease if you're having sex with more than one person or you're in a non-monogamous relationship. Yep. So
there's no perfect solution, actually. There really, really isn't, and that's where we are, and there's nothing we can do about that. You know.
So can we just discuss? So I can gather from our conversation with the pair of you that a lot of your education around periods and that would be diet, exercise, sleep. It's really unsexy. You're not just giving people a one-stop shop.
I know.
But it's a way of life. So do you want to just chat, please?
Yeah, there are some simple things, some simple changes that you can make. And I suppose one of our big things is exercise, first of all, and fresh air. And it's not like we're saying anything wild here, but getting back in rhythm with nature is absolutely crucial to lead a healthy life. And that means getting outside, not being stuck in the house the whole time. So even taking a walk, walking to school, for example, is a great start. But so many girls are getting dropped off to school or getting public transport and don't get outside at lunchtime even. And when they are doing sport, it's inside in a gym. So getting outside is one big thing every single day. Also, in terms of sleep, that's a huge one. So having a rhythm or a routine each day that they can stick to. Now, I know that is not what teenagers want to hear, and they usually will want to stay up late at night, but most teenagers are sleep deprived and they really need sleep. We all really need sleep to be healthy. So it's trying to establish that routine.
Is there something about teenagers, though, and the fact that the way their circadian rhythm works is that they actually naturally want to stay up late and then sleep in? So even our entire school system is not built around our children.
Yeah, absolutely.
They do say
they say that. I even find it myself. The kids, they want to go to bed later and then they love lying in, and they would still be getting the same amount of sleep if they went to bed 2 hours earlier and getting up earlier. So, there has been TED Talks about this that I've listened to where we actually should be pushing out school should start at 11 o'clock, but it doesn't suit us in our society.
That's exactly right.
So we're actually pushing against the way their little brains are developing.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. It's shocking, really. But, as I was saying earlier, whoever decided that we should be working from 9 to 5 days a week, whoever decided that schools should start at 9 o'clock, it would, even from a traffic perspective, it would make a lot of sense if you could stagger it. But, we are where we are. Yeah.
And I think a huge amount of the issues around sleep as well is the overexposure to devices. So many kids are on devices before they go to bed, and so many of them are bringing the devices into bed with them and have notifications turned on, and they're getting notifications through the night.
Sure, it's a wrestling job trying to get it well off them as well.
I know. You're not going to be popular as a parent doing that, but it's trying to put boundaries around devices in the bedroom and devices upstairs, full stop. I'd say just charge all devices downstairs.
Oh yeah, we have that rule too.
Yeah, so do we.
I'm not into really being popular as a parent.
Yes.
You're never going to win that battle. But I think and I think it is difficult, and every family is different too. But how much sleep should our children be getting as teenagers? So I know my 12 or 13-year-old might need more sleep than my 15-year-old. But do we have a time limit on it? Or?
Well, I would say the ideal is to be in bed by 10 and then be up around 6:30, 7. Yeah.
Okay.
So plenty of sleep.
That's going to go down well, would you?
Yeah, I know.
Well, it's them being able to switch off their busy little minds, and like you say yourself, if they're up to high dough on devices, and oh my goodness, and I've talked about this before, it's the whole thing about these Snapchats and WhatsApp groups and the fact that you can literally be on the phone to your friends all the time. I remember making phone calls, back in the day with the phone that you stick your finger in, you turn it around. You might be on the phone for half an hour, but that's it. But you're not getting constantly updated. Like I see it in my own kids' phones, like 12 notifications all coming in at the same time from different people. It's how do they
Not
keep
only
up
that,
with
but
it?
taking a photograph of yourself and sending that back to each person after each notification. You can't just take one and send it to everybody.
It
So,
is. It is crazy. So
I mean, there's a book, and I'm just going to get my glasses out because I want to give you.
Geraldine
the right
has her
name of
notes
it.
in front of her
My
because she
notes
doesn't want to.
in a
She doesn't want to
ring
give
in a
any
ring
poor statistics.
finder. There's a little book on it. It's called Girls on the Brink. It's fantastic, actually, and it's by a woman called Donna Jackson Nakazawa, she's a psychotherapist and a science journalist. And she has written a wonderful book about girls and the effect of social media and the effect that it has on their mental health and by extension then on their physical health. And from my perspective, I was looking at their gynae health. And just the whole thing about social media is that the people running social media do not care about the health of the people using social media. There's been a thing called the Facebook files where people in Facebook have looked at the effect of social media on the people who use them. And Facebook own Instagram. And they actually, back in 2020, I think it came out that they actually do know that actually Instagram is toxic for particularly girls, particularly more so than boys.
And why is that?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Well, it's to do with, they introduced the like button in 2012, okay? By 2016, I was seeing kids who were extremely anxious and unable to go to school in my clinics, okay? And they actually have a phrase for it. It's compare and despair. So you're posting pictures, you're not sexy enough, or else you're too sexy, or you're too fat, or you're too thin, or you don't have the right trout pout, or whatever it is. And there's all this pressure to conform to the peer group. If you're excluded from the peer group, way back in hunter-gatherer times, if you were excluded from the tribe, you died. Okay? All right. That kind of fight-flight reaction is hardwired into our midbrains. So if you're out of the group in school, you die a social death, and it's a really stressful kind of a thing, particularly for youngsters. We all know that youngsters want to belong. I mean, even if there isn't a school uniform, they will all wear the same clothes. So particularly for girls, because of the estrogen. And again, looking back at hunter-gatherer societies, it seems to be that women are much more likely to perceive danger than men. We think it's because of the amount of estrogen in women. The reason for this is that in order to survive, you had to avoid danger. In order to survive childhood, puberty, and adulthood, in order to be able to have babies and in order to be able to protect your babies. So we're much more wired as women to actually appreciate danger than men. The men were out hunting, whereas the women were gathering.
Is that why we're all a bit more chilled post-menopausally and we're all just a bit like,
It's
I don't
really
give a hoot?
Interesting, isn't it?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Because they always say once you get over that, over those hormonal fluctuations in your 40s, you literally don't give a shite anymore. What anyone thinks, and you just go about your day.
Yeah, I mean, I actually do believe that, and I think if you think about it, again, I've said this many times, adolescence and menopause, the actual menopause, or the climacteric actually, rather than menopause, is where you're getting the increasing hormones and the decreasing hormones are two sides of the same coin. Childhood, when you go out and you're making mud pies, or God be with the days, and in older adulthood as women, it's a different thing, isn't it? Yeah. It's really, I just find the whole standing back and looking at the whole picture, it's just fascinating. So basically, this business about social media and always being on, when I was a kid, and my daughter is 27, so that's the other thing, is a lot of these, all of teenagers now have grown up their whole lives with social media. They don't know what life is like without social media. Imagine that. Isn't that really fascinating? But also, when I came home from school, or when my daughter came home from school, and she was certainly in primary school, the door was closed and she was in a safe space. And she had, she could leave school outside the door, as could I. Nowadays, you can't. Nowadays, with all the notifications, it's all coming in all the time. And particularly when you're going to bed at night. So there really needs to be control over being on social media. I feel very passionately.
And it's interesting because Ayurveda will say there are 3 different causes of disease. And the first one is the misuse of the senses. And if you think of the volume of information that's coming in through the eyes and through the ears, never mind through the mouth in terms of all the different types of foods, it's just information overload through the senses. And with hours and hours spent on screens in school as well, learning through iPads, for example, and then on phones and watching shows on Netflix and whatever else, it's just way too much for the sense organs to cope with. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to bring it back to, we were speaking a little bit about the Ayurvedic medicine. Can you just explain Vata?
Yeah, Pitta and Kapha.
Yeah, please.
So Ayurveda is based on the 5 elements, and that's ether, air, fire, water and earth, or space, air, fire, water and earth. And if I just explain a little bit in terms of our bodies mimicking what goes on in nature. So these 5 elements are the building blocks of nature. And if you think about the earth element and how solid it is, think of a mountain, for example, or having your feet in muck or dirt or clay. It feels very solid and structured. And then within the physical body, that's the earth element manifests as our structure, our bones, that binding in terms of holding everything together. And then we have the water element. So you think of the ocean, for example, outside, and internally we're made up of about 75% of water. So we have saliva, we have plasma, we have blood, we have reproductive fluids. We're just full of water. And then we have the fire element, so that manifests as, for example, the sun and light outside. And we have the Agni, or the digestive capability in the body internally. So the whole digestive system that transforms and metabolizes what we ingest.
Oh my God, it's all coming back to me, Paula. I did the Heart of Yoga courses, Paula, when I was pregnant with my now 15-year-old. That was about 16 years ago, and this is all coming back now.
Your Agni has been strong since in terms of what you've accomplished. And then if we think of the air element, you have the wind and you feel the breeze on your face when you walk by the sea. And you have the movement of the breath, for example, internally. That's really the air element, is everything that moves within the body. So even the beating of the heart, the movement within cells. And then we have all of this happening within space. So you look up at the starry sky at night, and internally in the body, we have all of these cavities or spaces within the nose, for example, within the ears, in the mouth, in the throat. We have spaces between our teeth, between our bones and our joints. So we're just like a replica of what goes on in nature, and we forget about that completely. So Ayurveda categorizes those 5 elements into what are known as doshas. And these are groupings of the elements. So we have Vata, which is a combination of space and air. So the more Vata you have in your constitution, in your body, the faster you'll move, because Vata is related to everything that moves. So your body will move fast from a physical perspective. You'll talk quickly. So you'll probably have a light frame. You might be tall, slightly irregular features, and you'll have maybe bony joints. That would be an example of a Vata type constitution. And then we have Pitta, which is fire and a little bit of water. So Pitta has a lot of heat in it, obviously, because the fire element is so dominant. So a kind of moderate type of physique, quite athletic, very intelligent, sharp, good capacity to understand things, but also likely to maybe get a little overheated or intense when out of balance. So might take the head off you, for example, if they get stressed. And then we have kapha, which is more structured. So we have that water and earth combination. So they might be heavier, for example. They'll have a sturdier physique. They'll have maybe quite oily skin, tend to age really well actually, because they'll have like thicker skin and they'll have strong bones as well. So that's how the elements tend to manifest inside of us from a physical perspective.
But we can be mixtures of all of those three, isn't that
We
right?
will be mixtures of all three. Yeah, we'll have all 5 elements in our constitution, but what will be unique to us is the balance of each within us, or the percentage of each within us. And when we're conceived, the balance of elements in the egg and the sperm will determine our original constitution. And that never changes through our lifetime. So that will describe our bone structure, for example. So let's say you had nothing done with your teeth from the time you were born. The structure of your teeth it's unlikely to change. If you get braces, of course, that's going to look very different. But let's say the size of your wrists, that type of thing, as you age, it's not going to change dramatically. And it's your original constitution is also going to determine your innate tendencies. And also predisposition to certain illnesses and diseases that may be passed down through families. Now, the balance of those elements will change on a daily basis, though, even though your original constitution won't. So let's say the season changes and the weather suddenly changes from being really hot to really cold. That's going to impact the current balance of those elements within your body. Also, stress is going to have a huge impact on them. What you're going to eat is going to have an impact on them. The practices that you do, for example, your job, your work, all of that sort of stuff, the decisions and thoughts you have on a daily basis. So it's really 2 different things. You have the original constitution, and that's kind of your perfect constitution. So you always want to try and keep those elements at that particular level. And then you have your current imbalance, as it's known, the current balance of the doshas. And you want to always try and get those back to the original constitutional balance.
And by getting them back, is that a mixture of diet, exercise, sleep? Basically, it brings it all back to that?
It's really getting an understanding, first of all, of what your constitution is. And there's lots of different ways. You'll find lots of questionnaires online that will give you an idea. But you can go and have a consultation and you'll find out, okay, what are the balance of these elements within me? What are my innate tendencies? So we'll do it by a physical examination, really, just looking at what your physiology looks like. And also the mental tendencies that you tend to have, the emotional tendencies that you have. And really, you can work to keep yourself in balance by having foods that work really well for your constitution and limiting those that send you out of balance. And then also adopting techniques like yoga, for example, or exercise that really suits your constitution. So let's say you're a Vata type and you've got lots of space and air in your constitution. And because Vata is so light, it's the one that goes out of balance easiest. But the good news is it comes back into balance easiest as well. So if you're like sprinting every day, you're going to exacerbate, or you're going to really increase Vata even more, which is going to send it really out of balance. Whereas if you're doing gentle yoga every day, you're going to calm down that really quick movement in the body. And in Ayurveda, like increases like, and the opposite qualities bring you back into balance.
Okay, so just say if someone is Vata dominant.
Yeah.
What kind of foods should they be eating?
Well, the qualities that would be associated with Vata dominance would be dryness, coolness, for example, roughness, just to give you 3. So you want to really bring in the opposite qualities. So something like having plenty of oils and healthy fats in your diet will be really good for a Vata dominant person to counteract the dryness. And also you want to bring in warmth. So rather than having cold foods at lunchtime, And you would have nice warm curries with spices to warm things up and make it easy to digest, for example.
Okay.
Whereas a pitta person who already has a lot of heat in their system, you're not going to use those spices because they're just going to increase that heat even more. So they'll need cooling foods. And say a kapha person who is quite heavy by nature, you want to introduce light foods. So you're not going to introduce large quantities of very oily foods, which is just going to create more heaviness.
So how do I cook for my family when they're all different?
Well, there are ways of using spices so that you can create your own little churna, let's say, which is like a powder. You put them all together. So you could have a vata churna, a pitta churna, and a kapha churna. So you could make similar types of foods and just use the churna.
Okay.
Which is one easy way.
I think we have to have you back and just do a complete Ayurvedic session with you, Paula.
Sounds good.
It sounds great. Yeah. So let's get back to menstruation and difficulties, etc., and maybe some of the questions that have come in, and we'll see if we can work our way through a few of them. And you touched on this before, and I think that we need to maybe delve in a little bit more to it. The anxiety in teenage girls. How do mums and dads, where do they begin to deal with this and help?
Well, so what we're targeting with our My Girls Gynae, we're targeting parents and girls, mainly parents of 5th, 6th class girls in school, because we believe that if we can get started there, it really sets up girls to have a healthy reproductive and otherwise life. So I think it's really important. You're saying that, taking away the phones from your 15-year-old, it's not going to work, actually. But if you've never allowed that to happen from the ages of whatever age it is that your child gets the phone, be it 10, the rule is, the phone gets left downstairs when you go to bed and gets switched off or whatever and charged from about 8 o'clock in the evening. So, I think it's really a good place to start is as the child is beginning to develop pubertally, be it a boy or a girl, that's the real time to set the groundwork to try and improve access to devices and being available, because adolescence is such a difficult time. We've all been adolescents and we can still remember the absolute cringe times, and it hasn't actually changed even with all the sophistication that's around. In our basic selves, we haven't changed in the last 20 or 30 years. So being that safe person, providing the safe space in your home, providing good food, and actually it's really interesting seeing people have forgotten how to cook. It's actually amazing. People don't know how to cook. I never did home economics in school, but I could see what my mother did in the kitchen, and I'm not a great cook, but I know the basics of how to cook stuff. But we have children growing up now where there is no food cooked in the house, and so their mums and dads don't know, and they certainly don't know. So really trying to come back to the basic competencies, really, of, having a full night's sleep, reducing stress through your exposure to outside influences, and cooking and exercise. It's really interesting. We were so bound up in the exercise that we're, taking or not taking. 50 years ago, nobody went for a walk and nobody did an exercise class. And why was that? Because exercise was built into the day. Mm-hmm. You walked to school, you walked to work, you did manual work, you worked on a farm, if you were working at home, you were washing clothes, you
were scrubbing them,
you were scrubbing the floors. It was part of our day, and it's a really interesting idea that society has made our lives so much easier, but so much unhealthier. And I'm not suggesting we go back to scrubbing floors or using a washboard. No, definitely not.
Yes.
But
whatever tickles your fancy, people, tickles, okay?
Yeah, but so we do have to come back and just mimic what we used to do naturally by just bringing back exercise into the...
And having a hot meal at lunchtime makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
So if you can send your daughter off to school with a hot flask of soup or something in the winter, rather than them having something cold at lunchtime, it makes a huge difference. And, you know, again, Ayurveda
also feels warming.
Yeah, much easier to digest as well. So from an Ayurvedic perspective, we're all about getting the digestive system working perfectly or as well as possible. And that makes a huge difference to overall health. And having something substantial at lunchtime makes a huge difference.
I have these little hot pots for the lads. They're called Out to Lunch. And they're cool. I bought them years ago and actually just do not put them in the dishwasher. It ruins them. I've had to replace them because I put them in the dishwasher. But I give them like leftover spaghetti bolognese in them or you know, curry. And they actually say, oh, this is so cute. They actually say when they open it up and they open it up and the steam comes up, they get this lovely warm feeling. It's nice. So and that's a really easy way. But you have to have the food cooked before to put it in. So it does take kind of a little bit of planning. And I just double up on things. Now, actually, I've had to triple up on things as the lads have got bigger because I used to double up and there's still be leftovers. But now, like, you triple up as they get older, they just eat more. But getting back to girls and food, because there's huge issues either eating the wrong foods and too much of them or eating too little foods. And that obviously impacts everything from their psychiatric health or psychological health to their periods. So can we have a little open conversation with that? And this is a conversation that we want about. This is to educate people. It's not to offend people because there's no shame at all. And we have talked about the fact that you're seeing families, and I saw it too, generations of people that didn't know how to cook. That has a knock-on effect on people and their weight, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And I think that while everybody is beautiful and we have to accept that everybody is beautiful and it's very important that we do, there is without a doubt an issue with body weight and people, teenagers being overweight.
Yeah. So, more than the COVID pandemic, we do unfortunately have an obesity pandemic. I'm going to put my glasses on again.
Geraldine's looking at her scrawly notes.
A numeric. I cannot remember numbers. So, statistic
I feel
coming
a statistic coming on now.
So, 1 in 5 5-year-olds in Ireland is obese. I find that quite shocking. And we are the second, as a nation, we are the second most obese nation in Europe after the UK. So this is because of lots and lots of reasons. It's because really of the way that society is set up. Food has never been more available. You walk down the street, there's takeaways, there's restaurants, there's cafes, there's shops that are all selling food. It's really, really hard to avoid food in this society. And, you know, that's a good place to be when you look at other parts of the world. But really, you know, it always means we must come into the middle and have everything in moderation. So we have a real problem with the food industry and with ultra-processed foods. Ultra-processed foods are foods that contain chemical compounds which are not foods and which pharmacists like you would possibly know what they are, but certainly doctors like me don't know what these foods are because they're not foods.
But they do test some people. So the food companies actually bring people into a lab and feed them foods with a certain amount of sugar and a certain amount of salt in them. And they do brain scans on them and see what's lighting up the most. And that's where they know the sweet spot is to add just the right amount of salt and just the right amount of sugar to make that person crave more of that food.
It's addictive.
It's actually horrific.
Actually, it is a disgrace. It really is. And I mean, I think the food industry worldwide has a huge amount to answer for the obesity epidemic. Our government really could do more. Now, I know I don't like banging on about the government minding us and being a nanny society, but really I think we do need to look at what the role of the government is in trying to introduce better eating policies, particularly around childhood. The other thing, as I've mentioned, is the loss of cooking skills. So particularly people, and we're working, particularly in Western society, we work so hard, we're working longer hours, we're exhausted. What's the easiest thing to do? Get a takeaway full of trans fats and all sorts of chemical compounds, and really nothing that's good and basic. I remember I had one young girl, she was about 5 or 6 at my clinic, and she was obese, and I was just chatting to the mum and said, well, what does she have for breakfast and what would she have for her lunch? And her mum said, well, I know that sandwiches are bad, so I've been getting her potato wedges. I mean, so education, again, it's back to education. So this poor woman thought she was doing the right thing, and I was going, I couldn't believe what I was here. So she was giving the child potato wedges because sandwiches were bad because they had bread in them. So really,
education.
Education is so important. So the high BMI messes up all our hormones. It messes up our satiety hormones and our hunger hormones. And obviously it messes up our insulin levels. If we go over to the other side of it, then we have the eating disorders such as anorexia. So what I found during COVID was there was a huge increase in the number of girls with anorexia, bulimia, and a thing called orthorexia. Are you aware of what orthorexia is?
Is that where you don't like certain types of food?
Yeah.
Or you won't, yeah,
you become obsessed with eating healthily.
Yeah.
So bottom line with all of these conditions is that, and I think what happened, because we really had a huge increase in this in the paediatric hospitals of girls who were under eating, and I think it's a measure of control. We were in a world that was out of control, and that we didn't know what was coming down the tracks with the next strain of virus, and girls were at home and people were at home. And one method of achieving control was to really regulate what you were eating. And, what happens there is that we're reducing the amount of fat cells in the body when we undereat. So anorexia is basically you're just not eating enough and you might be skipping meals. Bulimia, you restrict your eating and then you'll have a binge and then you'll purge, such as using self-induced vomiting or a laxative. And orthorexia is becoming very obsessed with the type of foods that you eat, and you end up restricting the types of foods and the amounts of foods. And the number of girls and their mums coming in going, and I could see walking in the door that this girl was underweight and that she was here because of her periods had disappeared. I mean, you could see you had the diagnosis before any you had anywhere, but the mums, but she eats very healthily. But it's really not enough, and not enough variety. And we know that variety in our diet is really important, and it's really important for our gut microbiome. And this, I think it's, what is his name now? Yes, Tim Spector. He's really into eating, lots of different
plants
50 or something like that. Yeah.
But also eating seasonally. We tend to have lost that completely, and we're eating the same foods all year round.
Strawberries all year round.
Exactly. It makes no sense.
Makes no sense.
And that has a huge impact on the microbiome.
It does, yeah. And actually, when you were saying earlier about getting out in nature, actually walking in a woods has an effect on your microbiome.
Yeah,
we are so connected with nature if we'd only let ourselves be.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's the huge issue as well for buying all of this food in supermarkets in plastic packaging that's been shipped across the world as well. So as soon as that food has been harvested, it starts to lose life force or prana. So if we can eat food when it's just been produced and harvested, we get the most out of it.
Yeah.
And our kids are eating frozen pizza that's been cooked in a microwave sometimes. So it's devoid of all life force.
There's no goodness in it, yeah. But when you're overweight, really overweight, and when you're underweight, really underweight, you lose your periods.
Okay.
So the weight and periods is really tied together. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just one last thing on the foods there and what's good and what has changed. So many kids now are also drinking coffee, so have a lot of stimulation going on. And then also these energy drinks that are full of caffeine that are only available really in relatively recent times. So previous generations would never have had access to that. And that makes a huge difference as well in terms of the level of stimulation.
And how do you broach, your daughter's overweight? How do you broach that with her without, sending her the other way and obsessive about not eating or hurting her feelings or this or that? Do you just have to be blunt or practical and just say, look,
Well, I think, like, as I said, it is really hard to be a normal weight in our current society, given the way our society is set up in terms of the food industry. Okay. So I think that's where we start. Obesity or anorexia is a medical condition, all right? And if you're addicted to drugs or alcohol, you can give up drugs or alcohol. But if you're addicted to food, and you've just said about the drug companies, they're making us addicted to food because they're doing these experiments, you can't give up food. So it's actually really, really difficult. So we need to remove the blame. And the other thing I would always say is that it is a family situation. If I have somebody who's really quite overweight, the mum is often a little bit overweight, and this is a family issue. So it needs to come from the family. It's not just the child. It must come from the family.
Okay. So I have my own answer in this, but when do you start talking to girls about their periods?
I think you should start when they're very young, to be honest. And I think one of the key things is that you don't hide your own sanitary products.
Oh, Paula, you are just talking my language.
If you're going shopping and you're buying tampons or you're buying pads and your child asks you what they are, you tell them the truth there and then, and you start talking to them and introducing it slowly. And certainly we've had this question before, and we feel that you really need to have those conversations from 8 years of age onwards if you haven't done so beforehand. And leaving it till the child is 11 or 12, it's just too late. And you're setting yourself up for a real trauma, or you're setting your daughter up for a trauma if you don't address it before
she could
then.
get a period in school.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or else what happens is they all talk amongst themselves,
that's
and
the other thing.
Told,
and they get
you're going to die
incorrect
if you get that,
information, And you want to be the main person for your daughter in terms of imparting that information, and you want her to be able to come to you anytime and ask you questions. So I think it makes total sense to be really natural about it, to take away any sort of stigma around it, and to just talk about your own experiences.
Like you say, when you're buying your tampons or your sanitary towels, even changing sanitary towels when they're toddlers, so they don't see blood as this horrible thing, and they know, like, obviously you're not going to do it, as they get older.
Absolutely.
And certainly with boys. But I did just that. My boys were toddlers, and I'd be on the toilet and I'd change my sanitary towel, and they go, "Oh, what's that?" And I say, "Oh, that's blood, because mummy isn't pregnant anymore, because the blood is a little cushion for her womb if a baby goes in there, and it's a little cushion for the 9 months." And that was it.
Perfect. And it normalises it.
It totally normalises it. And now
small little pieces of information.
And that's it. And it's all the time. And we still talk about periods, or, "Oh, I've got a period, I'm tired today."
Yeah.
And I think it's just about it being a normal part of a bodily function, like going for a wee or a poo.
Absolutely.
And then it's not this big deal. So then the little girl knows that it's something to expect. It's something really normal.
Yeah.
And then
something really healthy.
Because
their mom has had it as well.
Absolutely. And it is a sign of health, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Menstruation is a sign of female health. And don't get me started on the whole thing about the fact that they don't even track menstrual cycles in an awful lot of pharmaceutical trials, etc. And now they're beginning to now, but they didn't for years. And outrageously so, because 51% of the population have a menstrual cycle, but they don't track it in a clinical trial. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now.
But just going back to having those conversations, I think it is important not to just have one big long conversation, because a child can only take in so much information, and they're only going to take in what's really relevant for them at a particular time. So little conversations where you're going back over things as well. Even my own daughter was saying to me, in school, of course, they have these talks, but they forget the information. So it does need to be reinforced.
Yeah, and it's constant little chats, and it's at the kitchen table while you're eating, and it's in the car, and it's just little bits and pieces. And because it's part of your life, it's part of their life, and it's not seen as
it's no biggie.
crazy.
It's no big, let's have the conversation. Exactly. It's no good.
Someone said, "Why do we have hormones at all?" Geraldine, you said you wanted to answer that yourself, so go on ahead.
Well, I liked it because she put LOL after it, and I said, well, we have hormones because if we didn't have hormones, we wouldn't be here. So why are we here? We're here to procreate the species. Sorry now, hunter-gatherer talk, here we go again. But really and truly, that's what all life is about. And people talk about periods and the difficulties and all of the hassles that they can have with their periods. But turn it on its head, and what if you didn't have a period? That's a whole different ballgame. And that can actually be a really significant issue for people. So we might moan and groan about our periods, and absolutely, and there's a lot of people have a huge amount of problems with their periods, and they absolutely deserve and should and get help. But turn it around and go, well, if I didn't get a period, then I wouldn't be able to have babies, and that could be a bit of a problem. Yeah,
exactly.
So I think I liked the question because, there you go.
Let's talk about moods and hormones and the menstrual cycle in general. What I'd love to do is talk about the moods, and then I'd love to talk about the tiredness and fatigue, and how we can help our daughters understand and track their cycle, and therefore understand their bodies that bit more. So who wants to answer that?
Well, in terms of the mood, from my perspective, I mentioned before that if you have a lot of pitta in your constitution, that's that fire element, that you're likely to become irritable and frustrated and just a bit angry sometimes if that's really elevated. So there are a variety of things that you can do to combat that. And we really want to look at how do we reduce the intensity in all areas of our lives, and particularly during the menstrual cycle itself. So I would say when you do have a period, to try to take a little bit of rest for yourself. Take it easy on those first few days, especially for teenagers when they're bleeding. Try to avoid like really heavy schedules and heavy sports schedules if they can. And that makes a huge difference to the following menstrual cycle that they'll have, and their feeling, their mood in the lead up to that bleed. And Ayurveda has always said that. Don't overdo it during the period. Whereas in society today, we have this, the media kind of goes, oh yeah, push on through. You can do whatever you normally do when you have your period.
Yeah.
And we feel that, yeah, that's normal. That's what we're meant to be doing. But Ayurveda would say, no, if we listen to the natural intelligence of the body, we know ourselves that we feel we're a little more introverted. We don't necessarily want to go out as much. We don't necessarily want to talk as much. We want to have a little quiet time. And we're much more intuitive at that time of the month if we really pay attention.
And in Ashtanga yoga, we aren't supposed to do inversions when we have our period. Well, if you're really
in fact, you're not supposed to do Ashtanga yoga at all for the first few days of your period.
Yeah, I know, but I'm shunning the patriarchy there, okay? I'm pushing on through it. But the back bend. So can you explain? Because when I first heard that, when I first took up Ashtanga practice, which was 17, 18 years ago, and I heard, oh no, you shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be practicing when you have your period. I was like, is that just a bit,
how dare they?
Patriarchal? And how dare they say that?
Well, it isn't actually, because when I spoke about that Vata, Pitta and Kapha, the doshas, they're really like forces of energy, and they're present everywhere and in everything. And they're also present and active at different times of the month. So when we have our period, it's that Vata dosha, that movement, the energy responsible for movement, that's really active, and particularly downward moving energy to release the menstrual blood from the pelvis. Now, if we do Ashtanga yoga, we really draw up on our pelvic floor. So we're redirecting that downward flowing energy and we're sending it upwards. And the same thing with inversions. So we're going totally against the natural flow of the body and natural intelligence of the body at that time of the month. And that's why.
There you go.
Yeah, I know all that, Paula. I'm still not going to do it, okay? I won't do my inversions. But that's about all. But look, I do get it. But then doesn't that go back to the way we're living today? Yeah. We're not actually listening to your bodies. We're just pushing through and doing it and doing everything that we can.
And sometimes we don't really want to hear this, though, because we've done it this way for such a long period of time. And so we don't like change sometimes. But it really does make a difference.
And do you think tracking a menstrual cycle is important for young girls? Geraldine's smiling here with wide mouths.
I do have a problem with a lot of the period trackers, particularly for young girls. And particularly, there are particular apps which will start diagnosing you if you have an irregular cycle. So young girls don't have regular cycles, and people can get really hung up on the fact that their period isn't coming every month or every 30 days or every whatever many of days. So I would actually say, I really think, put a note of it somewhere on a calendar when your period comes for the first year or 18 months. But don't be tracking it, because, you do have to be aware of the GDPR and that you've got, apps kind of telling you that it's time to buy your products and it's time to do this. And I personally, I'm quite old fashioned. I would find that quite invasive actually in my life if I'm having an app telling me that I need to go down and buy pads. And
Okay,
then if
but
the,
in
and then if
terms
the
of
period
tracking your
doesn't come,
mood, in terms of tracking
yeah,
your mood and
yeah.
that, is
So-
that important, do you think? And even just tracking your tiredness levels, so then
Yeah.
you might know the following month, oh look, I'm kind of coming up to ovulation, or I'm coming up
Yeah.
to my period, and maybe I just need to pull back a little bit.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that in early adolescence, you don't know what one cycle is going to be in comparison to another. Certainly when you get a little bit older and you know your cycle has settled down in the main, it's no harm. So the first half of your cycle, like from menstruation to ovulation, is what we call a springtime or a happy time. You know, it's your mood is good, you're pretty optimistic, you're outgoing. Ovulation occurs and you're right out there. You're at the disco or whatever it is
Because
people
you're
do
looking for the
nowadays.
man.
Exactly. It's physiology.
Yeah.
You know, you're ovulating, you're fertile, and here I go. And then in the second half of the cycle, we have progesterone, which calms it all down, brings you into that introversion phase, makes you moody, perhaps, and we'll get the symptoms associated with that. You'll get a change in your vaginal discharge. So if you can see that the first half of the cycle, you don't tend to get very much vaginal discharge. Second half of the cycle, you do. Okay, I'm coming into that phase. I'm not sure that we need a tracker to tell us about that, but I am old-fashioned, so bear with me.
I think
say
it's,
that.
I think it's quite
you're
nice to monitor how you're feeling
Yeah.
coming up to the period,
Yeah.
and to then start to become aware, well, hang on a second, this month I'm feeling really anxious, whereas last month I was feeling really irritable, for example. So, you know, from an Ayurvedic perspective, you can start to notice what doshas are dominant and what's out of balance. And you can even look at the flow during the month to see, okay, has the flow been a little bit scanty this month, which would indicate that there's high vata, or has it been super heavy, where it would indicate pitta, for example, or has there been clots in the blood, which would indicate maybe, okay, kapha might be a bit high there. So you can start to really notice these things if you pay attention.
Okay. And then for girls with heavy periods, you did discuss potentially going on the pill or to kind of regulate this up. People with heavy periods and then with painful periods.
Yeah.
What kind of advice would you have given them?
Yeah, so heavy and painful periods tend to go hand in hand, because the heavier a period is, the longer it usually is and the more painful it usually is. And really the mainstay from my point of view is to take painkillers and to take non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And
Do you agree with taking Ponston in the lead up to your period?
Not hugely.
Oh, do you not? Okay.
I think it's good to take it at the start of the period. I
Okay.
think it's it doesn't make sense to me from a scientific point of view, actually, but I know that people do.
People do to prevent the cramps happening in the first instance
Yeah,
if they get
it
very
doesn't
bad
really
pants.
work.
Does it not? Okay.
No, it really. Now, if you're getting cramps a day or two before the period comes, yes,
Okay.
take it.
Okay.
But if you're not and you're taking it because on Tuesday I'm going to get my period, so I must start taking my ibuprofen on Sunday, and you don't have any pain, no. I mean, you know,
Okay.
no, I don't think that works.
Okay.
It doesn't work like that. That's why we take it at 8 hourly. So, you know, you've got a half-life of medication. So it's not going to prevent that from happening. But the most important thing about all of that is that, like with any type of pain, be it headache or period pain or backache or whatever, when the pain comes, take the medication. Don't leave it for 3 hours until you're, you know,
In a heap.
doubled over and crawling to the bed, because there's no doubt about it. I would see in hospitals, somebody comes out of the operating theatre and they're tanked up with painkillers. Why? Because when they wake up, the painkillers are already working. All right. So it's really important as soon as the pain comes to get the painkillers in there, because particularly, so pain in the menstrual cycle is mediated really with two things. Number one, your womb contracts really tightly. So it's a bit like labour for some people, actually. So when the womb contracts, the muscles contract, and we're not getting very much blood in there. And that causes like spasm, like you would do if you'd done 100 squats. The other thing is that the endometrial tissue is being released, and the endometrium contains a thing called prostaglandin, and prostaglandin is an inflammatory chemical and it causes pain. So, and it's not being washed out because the blood supply has reduced. So if you get in there with your painkiller before that cramp really sets in, you're already helping with alleviating the pain. And this is where Paula comes in with the heat pack.
Yeah, I mean, castor oil
Yeah,
packs are
yeah.
fantastic. Not during the menstruation itself, though. So earlier on in the month, if you have a girl who's suffering from pain regularly, then you can use a castor oil pack. I'd use it a few times during the month and on a few days in the lead up to the period, if you know when the period is due and it's not extremely irregular. And that really helps to remove stagnation from the system, and it helps to increase the blood supply as well to the reproductive
What's a
organs.
castor oil pack?
It's been
You know
used.
now I'm going to go off and make one because this is what I'm
No, it's fantastic, and they're easy enough to make as well. You just get some castor oil, you warm it up a little bit, you have a clean flannel, you soak the flannel in the castor oil, wring it out a little bit, put it on the abdomen, cover the abdomen in some cling film, and then a hot water bottle on top. And the girl relaxes there for about 30 minutes, listen to a relaxation, and then you wipe it off. You can use a little bit of baking soda as well to completely remove it, or you can rub it into the abdomen. And it helps to clear stagnation. You can also use it, like if there's stuff that has built up, in Ayurveda we'd call it ama, so a little bit of toxicity there in the system generally, that there's high vata in the system, which causes exactly as Geraldine said, it's interesting, the constriction of blood flow to the organs. This helps to just open everything up and to just smooth everything out. It's really a great remedy. It's been used for since time immemorial
what's in
India.
oil that does that then?
An ingredient called, and I may not be pronouncing properly, but I think it's ricinoleic acid. It's called, and it really helps to do that. Now, there are certain contraindications. So, like pregnancy, definite no. You do not want to use castor oil. If you have suspected appendicitis, you do not want to use castor oil either. Okay. And they also say not to use it during the period itself because it will stimulate potentially more blood flow.
So is it basically, it's like a heat pack, but the castor oil does a little bit extra to it?
Yeah, I mean, it just starts to release adhesions and everything inside. So it breaks up anything that's become kind of knotted and blocked there. It's also very useful to put over the liver as well, if there is a lot of problems with the menstrual cycle. So it helps to clear out and cleanse the liver. So you can also alternate it on certain days. So you can put it up obviously higher on the abdomen, more on the right side of the abdomen if you're targeting the liver. And then if the girl is just suffering generally from period pain or something, on the lower abdomen on the lead up to the period. Okay. And you can use that little flannel as well over and over again. You can just store it in a little jar in the fridge, so you don't have to keep throwing out your face cloth and buying a new one every time you're doing a castor oil pack. Okay, and you think this is great?
I don't have any experience with it, but I certainly know that heat itself during the period, like the hot water bottle, and they're selling things like heat pads now that can be worn to school and stuff like that for girls who require a form of pain relief. And again, heat increases blood supply, and one of the reasons why you get painful periods is reduced blood supply. And the other thing that we can use, and a lot of people like to use this again because it's non-pharmacological, is the TENS machine. There are different types of TENS machines now available for period pain. So the TENS machine traditionally used for early labour, and now it being applied, and you can change the dose of the little electrical pulses, and that can also be very helpful. You know, a lot of particularly young girls, they don't like taking medication, and they really have a problem with, well, why should I have to take ibuprofen? I'm sorry, that's a philosophical question. I'm just a gynaecologist. But these are alternatives.
Yeah.
You know, and there's also alternatives with foods. Like ginger is fantastic for pain. And in fact, studies...
To rub in or to just
You can take ginger tea. Okay. You can also use it actually as a paste on the body if there's pain. But I'd recommend it in the form of ginger tea. And they've done studies with ginger versus the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and found that ginger is just as effective with no side effects. And also fenugreek is a fabulous herb as well. And studies have been done done on, in fact, like double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies on fenugreek, and found that fenugreek was way more effective in terms of reducing pain compared to the placebo group.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So there's lots of alternatives.
Lots of alternatives, yeah.
For girls,
yeah,
which is so
yeah.
important that everyone has something to try as well, if they're depending on what they want and what they don't want. I'm just going through the questions to make sure that we covered, like a lot of them are the same, so I just want to make sure. And is there anything that either of you would like to say that we haven't maybe covered?
Well, I'd like to just say, we need to actually, I think that was one of the questions, was talking to your daughter about her periods. Let's have a positive spin on all of this. I mean, there's no doubt, as I said earlier, if you don't have your periods, that's another ball of wax entirely, and that's a significant issue. And I'm not suggesting that we tell our daughters lies and say, oh, this is the best thing ever, because it's not. But at the same time, let's be positive about it. Let's, make it a positive story. There's no doubt about it that, increasing research is coming through about the way we frame our stories. Like, for example, there's been studies done on GPs and patients. If a GP is empathetic, really important. Empathy is actually one of the really important things to help reduce pain. Is empathetic and supportive to their patient, and they did a study comparing it and suggested a medication and suggested that this medication is really going to be of great benefit, versus another GP who is not empathetic, who said, well, I really don't know what's wrong, but here, try this anyway and let's see what happens. Guess which group did better? Yeah. It's the way we set up our brains and our minds and our expectations. And we have placebo effects and we have nocebo effects and we have all this. And I don't care if I'm feeling better. I don't care whether it's the real drug or it's the placebo. I'm feeling better. And the placebo effect is really, really incredibly powerful.
But it's the way we frame it, and you've said
it's really important.
This is what you guys are all about.
Yeah.
A girl's period is not an ailment.
It's a sign of health.
Problem. It is a sign of health, and it is the reason for life too.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So women should be, and girls should be told, this is an amazing thing. You're not becoming a woman.
Yeah.
Like when I got mine, I was 12, and my dad went down to the shops down the road and brought back a romantic ice cream. Do you remember those ice creams?
Yeah,
those
to
celebrate.
celebrate.
He says,
wonderful.
And
That's
he goes, I believe you
beautiful.
got your periodics, and that was it. And it was just his way. Periodics is what he called it. And Mum was all about it because Mum was a midwife, so it was always this constant conversation. So it was never this horrible thing that a girl's going to get and you're going to be in pain, because you tell a little girl that, and she's going to believe that.
Of course she's going to get pain. There's no doubt. There's no way
her
around it.
brothers should know about it, and
Yeah.
her dad should talk. It should be this open conversation.
Yeah.
So it's a wonderful thing.
And that's why I think if we can take a little bit of time for ourselves when we have a period, if we have a little bit of pampering and we journal and we connect with our intuition, it can be something to look forward to. Yeah. It can be.
Like your period coffee with your mum or your dad.
Absolutely.
On a Saturday that no one else gets to go to unless they have a period. So the brothers are gone then for that day. Like, that sounds lovely.
Yeah.
And I think it's about embracing the female body, isn't it?
It is really, and we have been, as a society, so it's a very masculine society, and we need to stop pulling it back.
And I think that I just wanted to say one more thing as well about the anxiety. So when we talked about anxiety earlier and how I saw there was a question in there from a mum whose daughter has anxiety, and how do you go about helping her? I would say if she can do something in terms of breath work, to connect with the breath. There's such a link between the breath and the mind. So learning simple breathing techniques can have amazing impacts, even just doing 5 minutes of breathing. And I know it can be hard to get teenagers to focus, but we have various different techniques that help them to do that. And I guess that's what we want to do with the online course that we put together as well. Because when we did our research, we found that not just Gen Z, but Gen A.
Is that us?
No, that's not us.
No,
That's
we're
the
well
latest
past that.
one. Jenna, we're talking like
right.
born 2010, the
goodness.
same year that the iPad was born. So they're completely au fait with technology. They've grown up totally with technology, and they don't learn just by reading. They're much more likely to take things in if they see it as well and hear it. So we felt, okay, we'll put together a set of videos on this. So we put together 16 videos on everything you need to know about periods, from heavy periods, irregular periods, the physiology of puberty, and we included yoga in there, 3 videos on yoga. So yoga postures that mums and daughters can do together, as well as breathing techniques to help to calm down anxiety, as well as deep relaxation, 10 minutes just to help them relax.
Well, the breathing is something that we could talk about forever, but you know yourself, apparently we're all going around more shallow breathing. So just to take that time out, and I've done it myself, and I don't get a lot of time to go off and just breathe in a corner, but sometimes on occasion I've gone and I've just sat down and I've tried to just, is it the length of the inhale needs to be half the length of the exhale?
If you double the length of the exhalation, that's extremely relaxing for the physiology.
If you do a 5-second inhale and a 10-second exhale, and if you even just do that 10 times or get your daughter to do that 10 times,
huge difference.
It actually regulates the nervous system and it can have a huge benefit to them.
Yeah, it stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your relaxing one. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's really important,
So ladies, where can people find you to find out more information about what courses you provide and to check out your Instagram, etc.? Where do they go and do this?
We're on My Girls Gyne on Instagram. We're on mygirlsgyne.com on the website, and you can find all the details on the online course there. You can just purchase it directly from the website. We also go into schools and do talks in schools.
Well, actually, there was some questions in there. Could this be part of the SPHE program? Could you come to schools?
We would love to do
we would. And we have been into
Yeah.
schools and also into sports clubs where we're talking to coaches and mums and daughters together, really about tuning into their period and the different phases of the cycle and how to really look after themselves.
And our
through
dads
that.
welcome at these talks too.
Absolutely. We'd love to talk to dads.
Yeah.
We've actually
really
done a
would,
whole
actually.
blog for dads on our website.
Because men are so much more in tune as well, and they want to help their daughters, and they want to be. So I think that's great that we're seeing dads out there too.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to get there's a particular spot I have my eye on in South Dublin, a beautiful space, a lovely old house, and we're hoping to develop a day retreat for a kind of day for mums and daughters. Maybe it's all in my head and our heads at the moment, but maybe do some food, some yoga, some
Might do Ayurvedic food as well.
Ayurvedic food.
That's lovely. Can I come?
Yes,
Absolutely.
I much prefer the idea of somebody coming to me with a question and me, it's very difficult when you just get a question on the phone. I don't know the background there.
I know,
and that's really, it's, when you, in a consultation, you get the background and then it gives you a much better handle on what's going on. Yeah. So just having something like that.
Always the doctor hat on, Geraldine.
Always the doctor hat on. I mean,
I know those quick fire questions.
I've been reared with it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask you both my 2 questions that I ask at the end of every podcast. So I'll ask you first, Paula. Okay. What advice would you give young people today?
I would tell young people to find some technique that works for them to manage their mind, because from a yoga perspective, all suffering begins in the mind and then it crystallizes down into the body. So if they can find something now when they're young to help to manage anxiety, stress, emotions, it's going to save them so much hassle as they get older. It will really stand to them in all areas of life.
Okay. And Geraldine, for you?
And if I can just add to that, if we can get it right in adolescence, we're going to get it right for their adulthood in terms of their fertility. And dare I say it, in terms of their menopause. So that I'm just adding
Exactly.
So my advice to youngsters would be, or to young people, would be kind. You don't know what shit people have in their lives. And we are so easy and so quick to judge and not even think about where this person is coming from. If we could all be kind, we'd have a much better world.
Okay. And Paula, what is the meaning of life?
It's a great question, isn't it? I think really it's a journey on healing ourselves inside so that we are able to see past the body, past the mind and the thoughts and the emotions, and that we really connect with our true essence, which is the same in everybody, and realize that we're connected to everything and everyone in the universe. And if we had that realization, imagine how different our world would be and how amazing it would be. But I think we tend to focus on trying to get the external right all the time. And really what we need to do is work from inside. So really it's about love, I think, because then we accept ourselves totally. We love ourselves unconditionally. And when we can do that, we can love everybody else, everything else, and our planet as well, unconditionally.
Oh,
I know.
Geraldine.
She's taken all my stuff.
I bet you told her that in the way.
No, I did not. But actually we were sitting in the car before we came in, and I said, so what are you going to say?
People think it's a trick question.
No, I know it's not, but it's the hardest question, actually, isn't it? Because and like we actually both have very similar. We both said our little things, and for me, it's very similar to Paula's, where it's to actually get to know yourself, to realize that what's inside has always been there. And people say, well, I don't feel that I'm 50. I feel that I'm 20. And like, if you think back, you can still feel how you felt when you were 10. And that's because that inness or that person in you or that being in you hasn't changed. It's unchanging. And I think it's really important to try to get to know that, to have the courage to get to know that, to lose the fear, because our society and our lives are very fear-based. And again, to be kind to ourselves. And a lot of times you're talking to yourself in a way that you would never talk to somebody else. And to be kind to ourselves. And therefore, as Paula said, if we can be at ease and kind and love-based and compassion-based with ourselves, that comes out in the world. And just look at the Dalai Lama. He's just kindness and compassion personified, and everybody loves him. It's great, isn't it?
I think it's the message from the Barbie movie. Have you seen the Barbie movie?
Well, actually, what happened to me in the Barbie movie, I took the last of the Barbie movie and I had forgotten that I had also arranged an appointment with someone, so I had to escape 10 minutes later. I only got back for the last 10 minutes, so I didn't see this massive scene that everyone is talking about. So I must go. But anyone who has seen it will know what Paul is talking about. Ladies, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for showing me.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.